G'day, Steve and Travis here for another live session. How is everyone this morning? Well, where I am, it's a very cold Monday morning. It's 4 degrees, which I know for a lot of the world isn't particularly cold, but for what we're used to here, it's freezing. So, yes, if my teeth start chattering or something, you'll know why. Yeah, welcome to this live session. I've got the chat on. I would excuse me, I'd love to know where you're listening from. I always find that really interesting. Hi there, Jessica. Welcome again. Yeah, that would be great. I thought this morning, um, look at why we approve, but why we improve, not approve, but why we improve from California. Hey, Joima, welcome. But I thought particularly I'd talk about why I feel like I've improved a lot in my drawing over the last year. And it's taken me by surprise when I sat down and thought it out and worked it out. Welcome, Alabama. The south of the US. That sounds nice and warm. So does California, actually. If you missed, it's 4 degrees here on a chilly Monday morning. So I'm glad I work from home. Yeah, why do we improve? I've got quite a few videos on this. Sorry, I just realized the screen wasn't pulled across on the laptop, and now I can see it all, which is great. Why do we improve? But it made me think, why have I improved in my drawing? I don't know whether you think of people who make these videos as still on their journey and sorting things out and improving as well, because my drawing journey actually hasn't been nearly as long as what I think most people think. I'm obviously not a young person, and I think because of that there's this assumption, oh wow, you're so experienced, you've been drawing presumably all your life, which would be a lot of drawings. And that's not the way it's actually been for me. I did draw when I was a kid. I liked doing that. We didn't have much when I was a kid, but we always had pencil and paper. And my dad had some books on the First and Second World Wars, and I used to draw basically battleships. I used to copy the battleships because I thought they just looked amazing. So that was my drawing as a kid. I really didn't draw anything else except battleships. I was even still drawing them in early high school, and I drew some and I gave them to this girl who's now my wife, and she still has some of them. So I actually have some of these battleships that I drew when I was like 14, 15, which is kind of crazy. I stuck a few of them on my Instagram channel last year, if you want to have a look. But then really I did no drawing for most of my adult life. I did no art for most of my adult life. And it was when my daughter won a scholarship for a year in art school. It made me realize how much I really wanted to do it myself. So I began to draw in my, I think I was 49 in 2006. And I just did a 1 year, we call them a technical college. It would be like a certificate course, just one subject, just the introduction to drawing, and I really loved doing that. So I repeated that a second year, but then I really wanted to paint, so I just painted, and I actually spent 10 years painting, not doing any drawing at all. And I painted like big tree canopies, particularly such as the ones you see behind me. And I discovered that though it wasn't as easy to sell large tree canopies as I thought it should have been. So I did paint lots of the Australian flowers as well, because they sold more. From Armenia, welcome, Slavic. So I didn't actually start to draw again. I painted, and I had exhibitions, and I think I did quite well as an artist painting in oils. But I actually didn't start drawing until 2018, when I was on a trip to Paris and with the family, my adult family, and we were walking back across the front of Notre Dame Cathedral, going back to our Airbnb, and it was just a beautiful end of summer's day. And I said to my youngest, who was doing a fine arts degree, do you want to just sit with me in front of Notre Dame and we'll draw it? And she thought that sounded exciting. And so we did that. And I was surprisingly happy with my drawing. Notre Dame is not an easy subject to come back to drawing at and location sketch. I was just sitting in front of it, and it was an amazing experience. And probably partly because we were in Paris, I was with my daughter. The sun was setting behind the cathedral, so we were in the shade with the beautiful warm golden pink glows of a Paris summer's sort of twilight just starting to happen. So really magic. But I think even then I may not have pushed the drawing, except my daughter wanted me to post this on my Instagram channel, which was full of art, full of paintings. And it got a lovely response, and that I found encouraged me as well. And I did some more, and I did some more. And when I got back to Australia, I didn't want to let go of the drawing, so I began to draw from my photos. But once I stopped doing the location sketching, I switched to a grids method, a 4x4 grid, because I really didn't feel confident to get all the architecture correct, and I really wanted to. So I actually then, when I first started drawing, I was drawing using a 4x4 grid. Now, there's nothing wrong with that process, and I realized that my drawing course, I have a drawing course with Class 101, but I realized through a few comments that people actually made me, I'd forgotten about this, that in the drawing course, I only teach drawing using this grid method. I actually don't do any freehand in that drawing course because I wasn't doing freehand drawing then. And that was only 2 years ago. So it's only really been in the last couple of years that I've started doing freehand drawing. And I started doing freehand drawing really because of the YouTube channel, because I thought, well, I can't be videoing everything with the grid, and that's not going to make sense. And I really wanted to learn to freehand draw more, because we had a big trip planned for 2020 in Europe with 2 weddings we had to go to. So I was keen to be able to street draw in Europe again, do location sketching. So I began to do freehand drawing. And then when I began to make YouTube videos, maybe 6 months later, I made them with the freehand drawing because that worked better. And I've been kind of surprised how quickly my drawing has developed. And I've done a lot of thinking about how we draw, what goes on in our mind, where improvement comes from, what makes up our drawing style. And I have lots of videos on that, and you've quite possibly watched quite a few of them. And but what I've come to realize just recently is, because of the things I've been thinking of lately, is that my improvement has actually, I think the fact that in my mind I've because I know I'm drawing things that I couldn't have drawn before. So when I talk about improvement, it's partly that I'm tackling new subjects, and I feel like I'm able to kind of be achieving enough of the things that I'm trying to achieve when I start to draw it, that I'm feeling good, feeling positive about it at the end of the drawing experience when I'm looking at the drawing. Not saying that they're perfect, but there's enough captured from what I saw already. And I've realized where this is coming from, and it's actually coming from my making of all of these YouTube videos. And the reason is that I'm an external processor. So some people like to do all their thinking in their head, and they don't like to talk about it till they've worked it out. Well, I'm one of those people, as you probably can guess, who's the opposite. I just talk and talk and talk. And as I talk, as it comes out loud, I work out what I'm saying. I work out what I'm thinking. And normally with this sort of stuff, with this art, and where does our art come from, and how do we improve, and what's creativity, and what's natural talent, and what's the process for developing an art style and for improving it and refining it. Normally all of this stuff, someone like me wouldn't talk about it with anyone at all, because like, who wants to sit and listen to that? There's no one around me. And even working at home as a full-time artist painting, I was by myself down in my studio all day, just with music on. there was no talking, there was no external processing. All the painting things I had to work out. I just worked out in my head, I guess, as I went. And hi there from Spain and Arizona, all these warm sounding places as we shiver in a 4-degree Sydney mid-autumn morning. It feels freezing here. Um, um, but with the drawing, then it was the same. It was just by myself. But once I started making the YouTube videos and I began to, I mean, I didn't even know really what I was going to be doing. I thought it was going to be very skills based, as in how we draw a straight line, how we draw a curved line, how we make lines meet at right angles, perspective, since I like to draw architecture. What time is it here? It's 8 a.m., 6 minutes past 8 in the morning. I'm actually a bit later than I planned. I planned to start at 7, but I just, it took me a little while to get organized. So sorry if that's would have been a better time for you. But I, and when I finish saying this, if you've got questions you want to ask me about how we improve or thoughts about that, then I'd love to hear them, and maybe I can answer a few. So just keep any questions you have for a moment. But I realized that sorry, I keep getting this. I'll stop looking at the chat for a minute, because it does sometimes just derail my thought. So I'm making all the begin making the YouTube videos, and I didn't realize there would be so many, if you like, more kind of bigger picture theoretical, less things that involve pens, and more conceptual videos. And I've come to realize in the last few weeks, and I think last night in particular, when I was thinking about this, that the reason I've been able to, I think, fast track my drawing development and improvement, particularly this last year and a half since I've been making these videos, is because it's really focused me on the creative process that takes place in our minds. And it's one thing to say, oh, yes, obviously it all starts in your mind, so that's the most important thing. But it's another thing to know how to actually develop that in your mind process. It can sound very theoretical, whereas when you talk about how to draw lines and things, it sounds very practical. Show me how to draw a tree. Where do I put the lines? How can I make my lines straighter or look better, or whatever? What pens are best to use? What paper's best to use? It all sounds very practical and very immediate for improvement. Whereas, in fact, what we draw, it comes from how we think. How my lines look on the paper and how they combine on the paper comes from my thought processes, comes from my thinking. Either I'm just trying to copy someone else in a fairly blunt way, or I'm trying to develop myself a way of thinking that I can translate what I see onto the paper. And I think that's what I've been working at doing. And because I've had, I think, through making the videos and having to think about it a lot more than I normally would, because I'm a fairly pragmatic, practical person. I do like to get down and do what's being done. And so I probably would have rushed with the pen on the paper much more than I do now, because making the videos has forced me to think about, what am I going to say? What do I actually think? And it's different to have a vague sense of thinking I understand something, to actually have to put it into words and have to actually crystallize it into sort of a precise enough way to explain it to someone else. And so the more I've talked about the creative processes in our head as being the starting point, the more I've given weight to that and actually thought more about what I've done and reflected more on what I've done. And I really think that's been the place where the drawing improvement, I feel like I can see in my drawing, has come from. From this place, I've had ideas. I've had, I think, a better understanding develop of the lines, of the marks that I place on the paper. I've got a video that I'm sort of making at the moment, which I think is going to be, I think, one of the most significant videos I've made in terms of really pushing ahead with our line work. But it's got nothing to do with how we hold our pen. And I think, yeah, lack of appreciation perhaps of the thought processes that really fuel creative development is what's been holding a lot of people back. Not because they're not capable of understanding it, but because the focus has always been on the lines on the paper. See, if I make a YouTube video, it's either me talking to camera, which may or may not appeal to people, or it's the camera down on the paper looking at the pen making the lines. It becomes very much looking like it's like it's all about the pen making lines. And the truth is that's the end of the process, and yet it's very hard for that not to be the focus of a YouTube video. I mean, how do we convey the cerebral part of it, the thinking? I mean, it's one thing to say it comes from our mind. Yes, everything comes from our mind, but how do I develop that if that's the source of Uganda, welcome. If that's the source of where it all comes from, then how does that get developed? I mean, we can practice line with line exercises, but how do we develop our creative thinking? And I've realized that I've developed my creative thinking by having to talk about it so much, by having to put it into words to make these videos. So firstly, guys, thank you, because you certainly have encouraged me to develop my art beyond the point where I thought I would. So that's very helpful. So now I'm trying to put what's in my head into words more. And I do have more videos now where I'm talking to camera, because I feel like if anyone wants to develop their improvement, so much more comes from how we think. That how the pen goes on the paper and how we draw our lines, it's driven by our thought processes. Our brain has to tell our hand where to put the lines. And I think this is the part that's actually not necessarily harder, but needs to be developed more than what we realize. And that from doing that, that fuels the improvement. I mean, even observation. I used to say observation was the most important part of drawing. Good observation was 90% of good drawing. And I still absolutely mean what I meant by that. But the creative thinking processes even comes before that, because it's what I'm trying to do that even determines where I look in my reference or what's in front of me, and therefore what I work out how to draw. My creative thought processes, then my observation, because I can't draw what I haven't seen, and then my line on the paper. And so the line on the paper, the part that I think a lot of YouTube videos focus on, is the final 5 or 10% of the process. The really big chunks are knowing what I want to do in my head, and then being able to see what I need to see to work out how what's in here gets applied to what's here, and then gets delivered through the pen, through the pencil. Um, um, and so I think that is a really important thing. And because I've been making these videos, it's kept me in the mind place so much more than I would normally have done. And I really think that's from my own particular kind of, I mean, I'm not just a teacher, I'm an artist too. And so I'm keen to develop my art and my art processes. And sometimes because of the videos, I do things I would never do. Like I would never have been doing 5 and 10 minute, 15-minute drawings. I did a 15-minute drawing for the video last night. And that was really fun, but it really pushed me. Now, I would never have the reason to push myself in that way um, if I wasn't making the video. And yet there are things I've learned from that that now go back into my mind and back into my thinking, my thought processes as well. So yeah, I guess that this is the surprise for me, that the largest source of my huge of my drawing improvement, I think, in the last 18 months has come from making YouTube videos that have forced me, well, not forced me, but enabled me, given me a reason to externally process all the thoughts about how I draw, why I draw, that are kind of vaguely in my head. It's made me make them precise to deliver to camera. And of course, I don't know whether you do or don't listen to everything I say, but I kind of do. And therefore I feel like I benefit from everything I say before anyone else does. And so the next drawing I do, I'm taking all of these things into my thinking, and particularly the things about thinking. I'm thinking far more before I put pen on paper. I'm conceptualizing how I want my picture to look. I'm trying to imagine marks, and I'm thinking in a different way with the way the marks sort of work on the paper. Um, yeah, create an art style without watching or copying other artists. Look, I think it's great to watch other artists, and I think it's great to be inspired by their work. Um, the thing I do is, if I see, and I mean, when I was in Europe last, I was still looking at paintings, not drawings, but there were some drawings I saw in different museums that I took, galleries I took photos of, and because they so inspired me. And what I do sometimes is I just look at them. I just look at them and I get inspired by the line work. I've never tried to copy them, because it was never going to look as good as theirs, because the way they make their lines are not particularly the way I make my lines. But if I look at these lines and think, well, I love the way these lines are kind of have a looseness, then I can, when I make my lines, I can think, I want to try and make my lines a bit looser. How can I do that? And it's not so much by copying their lines exactly, it's by thinking, what's stopping my lines being loose right now? Why aren't my lines loose? Why are they tight? I mean, maybe it's because I'm using a ruler. Well, they're never going to be loose if I use a ruler. Um, Maybe I take too long to draw them. So maybe I need to give myself a time limit to force myself not to be so fussed about being precise and tight, because when you have to draw faster, you have to draw looser. And that's one of the reasons I've discovered I enjoy drawing with a short time limit, because I tend to tighten up with the detail, because I like to get so much detail in. I like it to be precise. But I've discovered that by having and that did make me a bit kind of overly sometimes focused and slow. And I found that giving myself at times drawings with a very strict time limit, and if you're not strict with it, there's no point doing it with a very strict time limit, then that forces me to go faster. And the challenge is to find that balance. So I'm going faster, but I'm not going carelessly, or not ridiculously carelessly. And sometimes this is a way to start to mold and develop our style. If we want a looser style, if we want slightly more relaxed, more energetic lines, whatever. Um, the other best way, I mean, when I do see an artist whose work I like, I look at it, I look at the lines, I look at the way they've created the effects, I look at the things that I think, if I was drawing this scene, would be the most challenging. I always look at the things mostly that I know I would find challenging, because these are the things really I want more input on. And I think, okay, how have they achieved, if it's a tree, if it's a shrub, if it's something in the distance, if it's a baby's face, whatever it is, if there's something there that I'm thinking, I wish my drawing was more developed in this area for this sort of thing, then I look at it and think, how have they done it? And I just absorb that information as much as I can. um, and then I go off and I don't particularly usually try and draw something like that straight away, but it becomes part of what's in my mind now. It's now part of the resources of my own creative thinking now is that input, and hopefully I'll have a chance to use it before I lose it, before I just forget about it. Um, um, oh wow, David, that's exciting. David's done his first pen and ink drawing today and has found my videos helpful. Well, that's always encouraging to hear. Um, Look, no, look, Giuseppe, I think there is originality. I'm always surprised at seeing things, thinking, "Wow, I've never seen that before." Um, I think really everything is as original as the different minds that birth it. That's not to say there aren't, you know, there are things that are clearly derivative. There are things that are clearly derived that are, from someone else. Um, but I think there is scope. Every time I do something that comes from my mind, that's yeah, I think is, original. Um, Yeah, yeah, someone can say that's Giuseppe's work, and I think it is nice when we realize we've started to develop a drawing style, because that consistency in our drawing style actually comes from consistency in our thinking. I often have people say to me, "Oh, I get so frustrated. Every drawing looks as though someone else has drawn it, and I don't know how to get my own drawing style." How we draw, if we're not actually like slavishly copying someone else's drawing, then what we draw comes from how we think and how we observe, and then how we translate all of that into our lines or whatever onto our paper. And so the question is, what am I thinking? And I think probably what that shows is my thinking is in lots of different directions. And sometimes people struggling with their style, they'll lurch from one teaching material to another or one inspiration to another. And it's like every drawing is filtered through whatever the last thing they heard about how you draw this was. And so they haven't started to develop their own filter yet, their own framework in their head of like, okay, well, this is our basis, and I'm going to add things to this, and maybe reject some things because they don't go with what I'm thinking is working. And like that's not a criticism. That takes time, and it takes longer for some people than others, depending where our starting point is. Some people have thought about drawing for years without realizing it before they pick up a pen, and they actually start further down the track than even with their first drawing, than someone who has never thought about any of these visual arts creatively themselves. Um, Great. Summer art class starting tomorrow. That sounds great. Um, Observation and simplification have affected. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because it really is this translation of translating what we see onto the paper. And that's always going to be simplification, because, unless we draw insanely simple subjects like, I don't know, highly polished, perfectly white marble cubes, unless we draw things that are just very clear cut edge in a very simple shape, then we have to simplify things. And trees, I guess, are the largest example of that. Um, um, Yeah, 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 and yeah, perception does change, and sometimes, I mean, you look at the drawings of Picasso or Dali, and the way the creative processes in the mind have taken an observation and really given it a solid workout. It looks like they've put it through the washing machine and it's come out the other end in a highly creative way of trying to capture some essence of the original subject, and it could be a visual essence, or it could be something that's sort of deeper than that, and they've redrawn the form to highlight something in particular, either about the object, or even using the object conceptually about life. So um, yeah, this creative process is not just thinking how will I draw leaves. It's, we can end up with cubism or surrealism, or our own ism, through this translation creative process. We want to think about it in the widest possible sense. Um, Focus on thought process is what make your videos so valuable for me. Wow, thank you. Yes, well, I guess I'm just saying myself, Dor Winren, that I'm come to realize how important, how valuable having to think about and externally process the thought processes have been for my own drawing. I feel like they have really accelerated my own drawing ability. I hesitate to say this a bit because it sounds like I'm just trying to, push myself, and I'm not. But um, but I know I'm trying to draw things now that I've never tried to draw before, or I'm drawing things with a confidence within myself that I've not had before. And that may not be so obvious for you, but it is obvious for me. Um, the process as well as the result. So, and I really do think it's because making these videos has forced me to focus on the creative process, on the way we think, the way I think, and all these thoughts that for me would have just stayed vague thoughts if I'd been drawing by myself in the studio. I've been forced to put them into words for the videos, and as an external process. So that's actually an incredibly helpful process for me to go through. Why are cars so hard to sketch? Well, they're not, Matthew. Let me tell you, they're not. But I used to think they were too. And all my original street scenes had no cars and no people because I found cars and people's hard to draw. And the reason we think they're hard to draw is because we don't observe what's actually there. I've got two videos, Matt, on drawing cars, and I think if you haven't seen them, it'd be great for you to watch probably both of them, actually. One of them is in that blue and orange series, Easy Drawings for Beginners. And then there's another one with the black and red thumbnails as well. But in essence, the problem with cars is that we know too well what cars look like. And we do know what cars look like, but when we think of what a car looks like, we're usually looking at it side on. And sometimes, like if you're my age, when I picture a car, I picture a car how it looked in 1975, when I got my license, or whenever, like those sort of sedan cars. That's what a car looks like. And I mean, I look at real cars now with all this like blobby, wind tunnel-y kind of shape, and they hardly look like cars at all. But my point is that because we see cars all the time in our life, in certainly for most of us, we're so familiar with cars that when we see a car, it's hard to see that actual car from that actual angle. And what we tend to see is a combination of what's there and what's in our head. So the easiest example is a wheel. I know what a wheel looks like. A wheel looks round. And yet if I walk sort of back onto a car and look at it, there's no roundness in the wheel. It's what I can see of the wheel is basically a rectangle. And if I move slightly to the side of the car, then that rectangle, I start to see the side of the wheel, and it starts to become an ellipse. And depending on the actual molding of the fender at that stage, is fender the right word? I can start to see the actual roundness of the side of the wheel, and yet it's still just an ellipse. I mean, it's more two close straight lines parallel to each other than anything else. And yet when I go to draw it, if I'm not really observing that it's really just, this, I'm always going to be tempted to draw more of a circle than is really there. Because in my mind, I'm thinking circle, tire, circle. And that's the problem. We have a sense of how these things look at when we look at them straight on. And we always want to draw more that than what we actually see. And what we have to do is, what I find most useful is I look at whatever car I'm drawing from whatever angle we're looking at it from. And I just see it as a flat two-dimensional shape. I mean, normally I talk about form, see form, create form in your mind, see the form, and then draw the form. But with cars, because I think they are tricky, they're certainly tricky for me. I do the opposite. I flatten cars in my mind and I just see the shapes and I seek to replicate the shapes, which is certainly much easier to do from a photo. It's a bit trickier in life, again, depending on how close you are and whatnot. But yeah, so so it's learning just to see the actual shape that's in front of us and copying that. And then at the same time, bearing in mind it isn't shape, it's form. It's not two-dimensional, it's three. And so we want to allow for that. But yeah, learning to draw what we see, not what we think we've seen, is the issue. It's that drawing from the right side of the brain topic issue. Nothing wrong with quick drawings. I mean, if you haven't seen yesterday's video, it's a 15-minute video of a village street scene, and it was a lot of fun. And I find them challenging, and they teach me things because I'm inclined to do large, long drawings. There are no rules. It's only if, I don't know, Shadow, what you're calling a proper drawing, because a proper drawing is the drawing I want to do. And, I like doing larger involved drawings because I enjoy the process and I enjoy the subjects and hopefully I enjoy the drawing at the end. But it's not somehow morally superior to a different type of drawing or process. We draw a drawing successful if I've achieved as the artist something at least that of what was in my mind. I mean, when we draw, we're reaching into the invisible and making it visible. We're reaching into what cannot be seen and we're making it seen. It's an incredible process. And like, no wonder we're never really satisfied with our artwork, whether it's a painting or a drawing, because I can always see more. I can always picture more. That inspiration I have can be an overwhelming thing, because probably when I'm not just seeing my subject, but I'm seeing more than my subject. And it's that seeing more into it that possibly is the thing that really inspires me. And how can I capture all of that? We need to learn to be kind to ourselves with our finished products, because in some ways we're doing the impossible. We're trying to capture thoughts and bring them into being. So yeah, we should be probably more impressed with what we do. I think only in Titanic have I seen Jane Cameron's drawings, but I did know when I saw the movie, first saw the movie in the 90s, I was aware that he did the artwork. So I was very impressed at the time. I remember thinking, gee, I wish I could draw like that. 1 a.m. Yes, sorry, Giuseppe. Australia is a not very good time zone to do things with the world, except for Asia, which is nice. But yes, it's a complete story. Paint a scene, paint the next scene. Be found cinema. No, actually, I don't go out much at all anymore. I mean, we have a lovely little local cinema that we go up to here sometimes. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah. I remember seeing Star Wars when I think I was 20, and when it first came out and being so excited and sitting there as all the big credits sort of loomed overhead and all that, and just thinking, oh, this is going to be so big. Well, I just meant it was going to be a big movie. I had no idea what Star Wars was going to be in the universe, 40, 50 years later, whatever it is, close to 50 years later. Wow. Okay. Okay, bye, Jessica. If there's much more to this, you'll be able to see it. I'll be posting this live session on on YouTube as soon as we finish. Australia. Yep. 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 Australia's here, down here, having a good time. Yes, it's a sunny day, but it's a cold day. Let me just have a look. What is the temperature? It was 4 degrees when I started. My phone wants to see who I am. It's up to 9 degrees. There you go. It still feels pretty cold in the house, though. Yeah, we'll go for a walk when it gets a bit nicer. A lot of classic Japanese movies. Yeah, yep. And certainly, depending what genre we want to draw in movies, yeah, directors do frame things. I did one drawing, and I did a drawing of people walking up the stairs of the big staircase in Palais Garnier, and someone remarked that, oh, this looks like a black and white movie from the 30s, and I thought, gee, it really does. It really looks like it's a photo from a glamorous black and white movie of people ascending the grand staircase. Yeah. Yes, that's centigrade, the 9 degrees. Yeah. Mind you, I'd probably rather this than the 46 that we've didn't get this summer. I don't know whether we had any days over 40 degrees. We've just had a very mild summer. We normally have at least a week where every day is over 40 degrees centigrade. So, and it's been up to, I think, 46.8 is the most we've had here since I've been here. So I guess the cold's not too bad. Thanks for the bird drawing video. That's good. I got to confess that black and white, not black and white, the bird video that's in the easy drawings for beginners, the ones that have the blue and orange thumbnails, that's the first bird I've ever drawn. So I had this nice drawing of this lovely little bird, and I thought, and I was trying to think of some different subjects for that easy drawing for beginners series, and so I thought, oh look, why don't I sort of, and so I did what I say to do, which is a little preparatory drawing, not a thumbnail. It's just something to get a sense of whatever I feel I need to get a sense of. Often it's the texture marks I might think of using. Sometimes it's just the thickness of the pens and see how they go together for a little bit of the subject. But with this, it was just trying to see the form, the roundness, because it was a little fat bird, but there were kind of some moldings of roundness within the roundness. Now, whether they were feathers or whether they, I don't know, but so I did like a 2-minute kind of rough out of, if you like, the round circles that kind of merged into each other to form the body, and then I drew it, and yeah, I was pretty happy with it. And I think I mean, I'm saying that I'm telling you this now because I think it illustrates that really no subject is any harder than any other subject. Now, some subjects are more complex because they have more parts, but it's just the principle of drawing one thing and drawing another thing is fundamentally the same. It's the thought process, the same thought processes just being applied to objects that we haven't applied them to before. So I think that is a helpful way of thinking. Look, I don't have any books or references. I really am self-taught. I don't look at art books. I mean, I look at art books of paintings and things, but I don't look at how to art books. Not when I'm actually doing it. I don't think I've ever looked at drawing books, but I did look at a few how to paint books. back in the decades and decades of my life when I wasn't painting and I wanted to, when I thought about it every day. And I think I thought, if I buy books, if I look at books, this will actually get me to finally paint, although it never did. But when I'm actually doing it, I really don't read books on how to do it. That just doesn't work for me, which is ironic, me saying this, I realize, because I'm producing material that I'm hoping other people will watch. But you know, yeah, well, Rod Botting, I think, yeah, you'd if you can draw faces, the principle's the same. My daughter loves drawing faces. She really loves people, and therefore she loves portraits and does portraits and whatnot. It's not an area. I mean, it's actually an area I'm thinking it would be good for me to tackle in a way, as an example of what I was just saying, of exploring this. Okay, I've been developing just the creative thought processes that we use when we draw. It would be good to apply that to a fairly complex subject such as a face. And it's not that faces are any harder to draw, but the thing is, we have a higher standard as to what's acceptable as as um, as a face. Because, like, if I draw a tree, even if someone's got that tree photo that I copied from there, um, it doesn't really kind of like it doesn't really make a difference. Like, the tree's the tree. If it's not exactly the same, that's okay. But with a face, we look at faces from our very earliest memories. All going well, the first thing we look at is really our mother's face, and really her face is all we want to see and need to see for a while, and then we start to see other faces around us, um, and and so and then we look at faces to see how people are responding to us, or whether we can trust them, or whether they're going to make us happy or unhappy. Or so yeah, we look intensely at faces, and so we end up very early on building a very clear picture of, even within the range of the fact that everyone's face is different, there is a way that faces have to be, and if it doesn't fall within those broad parameters, it looks wrong. In fact, often it looks creepy wrong. And so when we draw faces, if we don't get the sort of proportions and the alignments correct, then it's not very forgiving for someone else coming to look at our drawing. And so I think that's why we feel that drawing faces is harder. It's not really harder. It's just that we have a higher standard for them, and so we can't really forgive sort of inaccuracies with faces as easily as we would with a tree. I mean, you've no idea what that tree looked like, and it doesn't really matter as long as this looks like a tree. But with a face, unless I've got a deliberate distorting method of drawing, I'm doing a Picasso cubist face or something, which then changes it again. But if the face is meant to be realistic, we all have a sense. And like the biggest, when I look at faces, when I look at portraits, the biggest problem still is that we focus too much on this, because again, this is what we focus on in life. Sometimes life and death will depend on my reading someone's face properly. It doesn't usually depend on my reading their forehead properly. Um, Usually the information I need for my survival doesn't come from someone's forehead. And so foreheads aren't terribly important parts for us to focus on most of the time, most people. And so when we draw, we tend not to observe this part as carefully, and we tend not to have as good a memory of this part. And so we have this overemphasis of the features. So a common mistake with portraits is features too large for the overall shape of the head. I mean, the eyes really do, for almost all people, go across the center. You keep the, yeah, not really, but it's true, because the top of the head goes up a lot further too. And then depending on the hairstyle and how much hair is fluffing up or not fluffing up or not there at all, but in terms of the top of the head, the eyes really are halfway. But most of us know that. If we've drawn at all, most of us know that. But it's still hard to actually do. And it's the same with this distance too. The distance from here to here is so much longer than we expect. Just, yeah, measure, look, yeah. And that's why it's helpful to study anatomy. I often think of if we draw faces or portraits or life drawing, then we have to really study anatomy the way drawers of architecture study perspective. You know, it's like the underlying theoretical framework that's helpful to know. I mean, I can just draw from observation always. Any subject, I can just look carefully and draw what I see. And if I observe accurately and I then transfer that onto my paper accurately, then I don't need to understand anything about anything. But it's easier to see what we need to see if we understand what's happening. If I understand perspective, then I can see the angles and the patterns of the angles so much more easily. And if I can see them more easily, I can draw them more easily, more accurately. And it's the same with the underlying anatomy. And I mean, you know, comic work is huge now, and you know, if I were wanting to push into comic artwork, I would really be studying anatomy, because it, you know, in my mind, it's inescapable. It's like trying to do architecture without perspective. Look, you probably can't really do it successfully. So, how to paint clean architecture? Yeah, the problem is it's hard for me. I want to see a movie about that's just come out. It's more of a documentary on the Australian singer John Farnham, called The Voice. I think it's by Paramount. But look, if you get the chance to see The Voice, about this Australian singer who was a hit when he was 15. Like he's only a few years older than me. Yeah, check out The Voice. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen the shorts. It's here locally. We're hoping to try and see it. Faces not flat is a challenge. Yep. Trying to represent form. And the reason I think that the faces are often flat when we draw them is because we haven't visualized the three-dimensionality of them from our reference adequately. And this is where we come back to that same old problem, that photos are great because they capture things in 2 dimensions, and that makes it easier to draw things in 2 dimensions. But they minimize the impact of 3D, and so they look flatter, and therefore we tend to draw the flatness. If we draw from life, if you normally draw from a photo and have trouble with faces that look flat, then get a patient family member or friend and draw their face, because when we can perceive the 3D more easily, we'll be able to draw it more easily. So I can really recommend doing that. First drawing was a budgie. Very good. Yeah, look, Infinity Ops, about drawing from imagination. I don't draw from imagination. I mean, I doodle sometimes when I'm bored and I'm waiting for something to happen and I've got pen and paper in front of me, but I actually don't draw from imagination, really. So you can't. I don't think. Yeah, I really don't think I've got any information, because most of my teaching comes from my experience. It comes from my art journey and the things I've learned that I feel have been beneficial for me. Um, it's not like I have a theoretical framework. But mind you, the reason I think a lot of those perspective videos are so unhelpful is because they're made by people who don't draw or don't draw architecture. But they've just realized perspective is a subject that get lots of hits, and so they've looked at a couple of videos, and they've just sort of copied the information, made it slightly different, and posted it. And I think the reason. Oh, thank you, Joni. Someone's just given me a super thanks. That's very kind. Thank you. That will be a lovely cup of coffee at some stage. Maybe a bit later when it warms up enough to walk up to our local cafes. I live in a like a little village that has some lovely cafes, so that would be good. Um, um, no, I've got no idea what I was talking about. That probably means I've done actually a lot of videos on foreshortening, Suzanne. Um, yeah, one of them is sort of a consistent one doing well. So I'm surprised you haven't had it prompted, but yeah, I do have. If you go to, I have a couple of playlists. I have, I think, 3 playlists on perspective. So if you're particularly interested in what I say on perspective, and foreshortening is, if you like, what we think of as normal perspective is like perspective in the this way. As things get further away, they get closer together, and so they kind of wedge shape. Foreshortening is, if you like, perspective this way. As things get further away, they also get closer to they get closer together. But because they're vertical rather than horizontal, the getting closer together doesn't mean that they converge. It means that the parallel lines get closer together. So it's just the same principle for shortening as the diagonal kind of lines to vanishing point. But one's how that distortion works horizontally, and one's how it works vertically. So foreshortening is very much perspective. So go and have a look at my perspective playlist, and just, there's obviously overlap. I mean, there's obviously overlap in lots of my videos, but sometimes, well, I certainly think that all my newer ones are more developed in thinking. They're more developed in putting together the complexity of the process of creative thinking and careful observation and drawing. And, I mean, yeah, so I certainly like those. But yeah. Look at the playlist, and because with perspective, there are some quite specific ones. Perspective going uphill, perspective going downhill, perspective going around corners, perspective on streets that are not even straight parallel sides, or going to the one vanishing point on dead flat land, and all the buildings are at right angles to each other. I mean, the conditions on most perspective videos are so theoretical. They're so abstract. There's almost no place, almost no place in the world where it actually works that way. And the problem is that, I don't know, the people who make these perspective videos, they can't draw themselves, unless maybe they're architects, because these little theoretical constructs that they use just almost never apply the same way in life. And so they just end up being confusing. And the problem is, we're too quick to think the problem's with me. I'm dumb. I can't understand it. And that's not just true. And that's just not true. The problem is with the video presentation. It hasn't told me how limited it is in its usefulness to me as an artist. And I actually think that, I mean, I've had so many comments, and it's been very encouraging, saying, I've never understood perspective until I watched your videos, and your videos have, really encouraged me to understand it, and all, really great comments like this. And I'm sure it's because I'm a drawing artist. And so I've had to ask the questions that other artists have asked, and worked out the solution. What happens when the street's curving? What does that mean for the perspective? Because this idea of the 2 vanishing points or 1 vanishing, it just doesn't seem to work with the street in front of me, or the street that's in my head. How do I kind of work that? So I've had to kind of work that out. And, well, obviously, if I have needed to know it, other people will need to know it. And I think that's the advantage. Oh, Joni, thank you. That's very kind. Or I can afford to buy my wife a coffee as well. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Late bloomers in art. Well, I basically started art at 50, and I started drawing at 60. So that's pretty late. I mean, I wouldn't want to leave it much later, but I get comments from people who've started art at at 70. They said I'm 72 or I'm 75 and I've just started, and it's great. I love it, and I get really excited about that because it's never too old. It's easy to think. I mean, um, I remember I was like 20, and a friend had started to learn to surf when he was like 17, 18. I remember thinking, oh, wow, gee, I never thought you could start to surf that late, but gosh, well, it's way too late for me now at 20. I mean, at 20, I'd written myself off for being able to do something. Now, I guess I didn't really particularly want to learn to surf, or else I might have tried. But it's easy to think, oh, it's too late. It's not too late. If I've got breath in me and I've got the physical ability to do it in some capacity, and I want to do it, then I need to give it a go. And gosh, look, the wonderful thing about drawing is that it's so accessible. It doesn't take a lot of equipment. You just need a pen and paper, something to lean on. I mean, I've got a lovely book on aerial views of Paris that's a good size for the A4 sheets of paper that if I want to doodle or just practice or rough out or whatever, and you just need a pen or a pencil. It doesn't have to be fancy. Um, um, and so it's a great activity. It's a great way to develop our creative thinking. And I think actually that the older we get, the more important it is to push our creativity as a means of keeping our brain ticking over. I actually think that this drawing journey, and particularly the way it's now intertwined with YouTube for me, has really worked hard to keep me young in my mind and in my thinking, and I'm really really appreciative of that, because I hadn't planned it, but and it's pushed me to be more constant with this, than I would have been otherwise. I really, I have a schedule. I have a timetable in my head of videos that I want to get out and things I want to do, that I actually work quite hard to do because I want to do it. But again, I'm sure that really benefits, what's going on in here to keep it active. The old use it or lose it is true, you know with so much about our body and our lives as we age. So let's make sure we keep using the things that we don't want to lose. And as I said, drawing is a fantastic way of doing that. So I think it's great when people and not just because of that. I mean, if there's something my whole life I've been dreaming of doing, I mean, some things are just never going to happen because they never could have happened. We just would have thought they would have been great. It's too late for me to get a Best Actor Academy Award. So some dreams we have to let go. But if things are, but something that is actually still achievable, it's great to have a go. I mean, I feared that I would never actually do the art that I felt was bubbling in me. From 20 to 50. I was thinking, early on, you think, oh yeah, some stage later I'll get round to this. But then you reach a point where you think, no, I might never get round to this. I might never get round to drawing for all the reasons I never have, or painting, or whatever it is I want to do. So I think it's fantastic. Late at life, I had no chance of studying at university, and just because so much depends on your teacher. You can pay a lot of money and not get much help. So in some ways, we still need to take responsibility, I think, ourselves, and find the journey that will work for us. But the good thing about a course, though, is if I have trouble being consistent, a course makes me do things at certain times. So as in a course I have to go physically somewhere for. So and there is the encouragement that comes from working with others doing the same thing. And I do miss that. I do miss not having people around that we can share and laugh and joke about what we're drawing and just sort of have a good time. Um, uh, Yeah, yeah, at 55, yeah. And look, art is one of those things where a lot of people have bad experiences as a kid, where they drew something and everyone laughed, or the teacher seemed to ignore theirs and praise someone else's. And, it's so sad, but that can have a devastating effect on us as well. And we need to learn to, if we have any unhelpful voices in our head like that, if we still have our first grade teacher's voice saying, "Oh yes," and just seemingly, and we just keep hearing him or her say, "Oh yes," and just dismissing our effort that we were really excited about, then I need to speak back to that voice, Look, that was a fine drawing. You were just having a bad day, you know. I'm not letting your dismissive comment determine what I do or don't do. And I think it's really helpful to sometimes speak back to some of the unhelpful voices that we remember from our past, particularly with drawing, because there often is a lot of trauma, and often the trauma is there because the drawing was important to us and it still is important to us. And this person just made a careless, thoughtless comment, and didn't give us a moment's thought, and yet sadly sometimes it's impacted decades of our life after that. um so I think that's yeah, I always love, in fact, one of my videos that I get, I think, the best comments from, I've got a video on oh, I can't remember the name, but something like, basically it's like tips for drawing if you start later in life. And yeah, I really love the comments I get with that, because there is this excitement of discovering something later. Hi, Araset, great that you can join us. It is an hour and 6 minutes. Oh gosh, it's over an hour already, so I probably need to start winding this up. Uh, no, I think all of life is a creative process, and there are, um, our experiences of life feed into how we see things and how we draw things, and sometimes it's our confidence too. I think one of the reasons perhaps my art is better now than it was is that I'm simply more confident as a person now, and that lets me take more risks, because yeah, like, I mean, as you can probably guess from my videos, I've had a bit of a at times issue with sort of perfectionism and being afraid of making mistakes, and and this probably is tied up with why I stopped drawing sort of through high school, and it just became the thing that was like this pressure that I wanted to do it but I couldn't do it. And hey, hello Thessaloniki. I don't know if it's still true, but I read that Thessaloniki used to be the second largest Greek city. The largest Greek city was Melbourne, Australia. So I don't know whether that's still true, but George, but there you go. Yeah. So fear of making mistakes and all of this can really, well, it can just stop dead our drawing or our creativity in any field. So cameras are for capturing precise, yeah. And look, even but cameras don't capture everything because they lose depth. They don't get that, they don't capture 3D. They compress everything into a very kind of close plane. And so that makes it hard to draw. That's why, if we go back to that earlier comment, drawing from photos of faces often results in the faces looking very flat, because we lose the three-dimensionality that we keep much more easily if we draw from life. I don't know how many of you have seen that video I did, or maybe the fifth or sixth last video ago, where it was a bush scene, and I had a photo that I took. I think the video is something like, "Don't draw from photos before you watch this video." So that's roughly the the topic. And it's about how the photos lose the 3D. But I have this photo of a scene, and then I have a short video clip where that same scene, I just very slowly move the camera past. And by doing that, it gives a very strong sense now of the 3D that I had just standing there taking the photo, but which wasn't captured in the photo. And I think it's a brilliant sort of way of seeing how lacking photos are and the impact that losing the depth. And how many of us, I bet you, you watched it, Teddy Bear, great. I mean, how many of us have taken photos of trees or of natural scenes, bush scenes, thinking, oh, this is just such an amazing tree. I'm going to draw it. I'm going to paint it. And when we get home, it's like, oh, I can't see what's so special about this now. And that's because so much of what takes our breath away is the depth, the seeing through this enormous canopy. Yeah. Pen and ink drawing. Yeah, David. Yeah. And that's something I learned. It was so hard for me to switch from pencil to pen because I don't like mistakes. And so I had to learn both to embrace mistakes, but also to learn that mistakes almost never are as bad as what we think they're going to be. Like we, again, I think, man, if I'd never drawn in pen, I better not. This is a moth-eaten jumper. I have to keep the holes out of camera view. But I was thinking, man, if I'd never gone there because I was afraid of the mistakes, I would have never learned that the mistakes don't matter nearly as much as I thought. So it is always good to push us. But if I can just sort of pull back to the I guess the start of this, why is my drawing improved? For me, the surprise reason why my own personal drawing has, I think, improved so much recently is from making these videos and from having to put into words the process, the creative process, the thinking processes that have been swirling around vaguely in my head, but which I wouldn't have understood with the same clarity if I hadn't actually had to put them into words, because I'm an external processor and I do my best thinking when I say it out loud. And, there's really no one here where I live who would be happy to hear this day after day after day. And so in some ways, yes, YouTube has actually most surprisingly been a means for me to externally process the thinking that's been going on. And as I've become clearer on where our drawings that finish up as lines on paper come from in our mind, I've been able to direct all the parts that have to come first if you want to get those lines on paper looking the way they should. And I just keep thinking, the more I think, the more ideas I get of relevant thinking. And before I put it in a video and hopefully benefit people who watch the video, I get to benefit from it myself. And I see it all the time. Don't rush to put pen on paper. Give time to the thinking, to the planning, and of course the critiquing afterwards is still part of that process as well. The critiquing afterwards is very important because it gives us a focus, and particularly if we're not happy with the drawing. If we're not happy with the drawing, the very worst thing I can do is tear it up and throw it away and storm out. We all know that feeling. But it's more important that I look at it and I say, why hasn't this worked? Now, it could just be a careless line, and that's different again. But if it's not just a moment's distraction, then it's great if I can work out what's not happening the way I want it to happen, because I can use that will consolidate
the intention that I want in my next drawing. And I think that's the other thing I have benefited from too in drawing so much so closely together. You don't like the hot weather, Suzanne, or the very cold weather we have at the moment? Oh dear. I'm just being told by my phone how many hours screen time. It's often like 10 hours a day. I need a phone intervention, but I think it records all the time. It counts the time I spend videoing and editing as phone time. How do I compose a painting? Look, I haven't actually painted since in the last like 4 years. There's a few reasons for that. How do I and when I did, I just there's just two other paintings I can grab from within microphone reach that are here. Just to answer that, so besides the trees, I really just did. So these are Gaimea lilies, and so I guess this is a composition I really like. I'd probably put slightly more green in the palms. This is a relatively early painting, so I was a little hesitant with color still. I was still finding my color boldness. So I don't know, how did I compose it? I just it was from a photo, so I just kept cropping the photo until it looked right. There was actually the Art Gallery of New South Wales behind this, a big sandstone building. So I removed that because I love the silhouette against the sky of these flowers. They're called Gaimea lilies, but they're not actually lilies. Yeah, I was always surprised I never sold this painting, but I really like it, so I don't mind that. I'm very happy to have it on the walls. And then this is at a different scale. This is eucalyptus blossom. This is an enormous gum tree we have in our backyard. I painted this for my wife because she really liked it. She really liked the reference. But again, it's like how do I compose it? You know, I like to have some breathing space somewhere. I love the way with Australian trees and things, our sky is so blue that I like the way the sky sits behind things and comes through in different spots. And with this one particularly, I was playing around with the with capturing the effect with the camera, where you've got with a foreground focus subject with hard edges, and then you've got blurred edges in the back. So but that's the sort of thing. I've certainly never been painting the sorts of subjects I draw. Like I did paint one building that I gave my son very early on, and I did a painting of a tower in south of France for my mother, because that had a family connection. But except for that, I haven't painted any buildings at all. Yeah, that is, well, it's a eucalyptus, eucalyptus blossom, a very small, creamy white one. Yeah, there. I didn't plan to stop painting, but it just turned out that I lost use of my studio temporarily, and I thought it was only going to be for about a couple of months, and so I just pushed all the painting stuff into a corner and then moved into a spare room in the house and made that my drawing studio. And then I had, it turned out being 18 months before my studio was available again. And so, it really wasn't. And by then, my world had been taken over by drawing and making YouTube videos. And I really loved it because, I did train as a teacher. I taught in high schools for 3 years, not art, English history, but I couldn't go back to it because of voice troubles I had. And making the videos has made me realize that, within myself, I feel like I'm just as much a teacher as I am an artist. And so I've got these two things that I've spent most of my adult life not doing at all. And now they've both come together really nicely in the YouTube world. So, I hope that helps the videos in some ways. Yep, I have a couple of videos on practicing lines, smooth corners on those cars or gadgets. I'm not really sure what you mean by smooth corners on cars. Um, so I don't I don't smooth edges. Look, how we draw edges. I mean, lines are tricky things. Lines and edges. Because when we look at something such as a car and we draw the edge, it does give the effect of an outline, but it's really often, if we think of a car curving, it's the round form of the car disappearing from sight. That's what we see. And sometimes a very light line works best there, rather than a heavy line that makes it look like it's a cutout shape. So edges are really important. Like in drawing, we always should pay attention to our edge lines. And so when we do something like a tree, the worst thing we can do, and not the worst, but it's unhelpful usually when we draw, to do like a heavy outline around the perimeter, around the silhouette of which is often the first thing that people do. And yet, if it's a very big tree, those leaves can be actually 15 meters further back than maybe the leaves that are here, which may be on a branch that's coming out to us, straight at us. And so there might be, on a big gum tree, there could be 20 meters difference between these leaves here or these leaves here and these leaves up here. And these leaves over here may be on the far side of the tree from branches going away from us, and you could have 30 or 40 meters difference between the two lots of leaves. And so it's not appropriate to use, I don't think, to use the same line to represent leaves that are so far away. And some of the leaves might be close enough that we can actually make out individual leaves, whereas with the furthest leaves, that's not the case. So we always have to consider, before we put our lines on paper, what it is we're drawing in relation to the other forms and therefore the other lines. Now we're coming back to the creative thought processes, which is where I started this video with my own drawing improvement, coming from as I've refined my creative thought processes, which has been, in my case, sped up because I keep making YouTube videos where I have to talk it out loud, and therefore I have to become clearer on exactly what I'm thinking, and then I'm the first person who gets to apply it to their drawings. And so the lines we use to capture form depends on what the form is, what's happening with the form when we see it. Am I seeing an edge, or am I seeing a form curve away from me in some way, or towards me in some way? Because all of this will affect how, excuse me. All of this will affect how we see something, and therefore how the lines should look. Because what I want to do is I want to have different lines for different things, for not different objects, but different visual presentations of form. And I think one of the huge advantages I had with my drawing is that I painted for 10 years before I did any drawing. And it didn't just help me with trees, although I think it did help me with trees, and meant that trees weren't a big problem for me the way they often are for people. because I had to kind of manage the fact that with trees, we need to understand form, not edge and outline and shape so much, but this complex three-dimensionality of its form, of the canopy, punctuated by the branches. What was I thinking? Yeah, but that also then overflowed, thinking form rather than edge and line, overflowed so much into my drawing, and it is a and so it became the principle. I mean, I often talk about drawing the effect of something, not the exactness of something, and it came from painting trees. It came from the principle that I worked out with leaves as a way of thinking so that I could manage the creative transformation of a tree canopy in life to something on canvas that looked credible. And when I was drawing from photos, which most of the time I was, then I also had to look at my photo and learn to put the three-dimensionality back into it. I had to work out which of this greenery is coming towards me, which is moving away from me, and then I would actually circle different parts of it just to give me a stronger sense before I began to put the paint on paper, because I would have harder edges with closer parts and brighter colors with closer parts, and I'd make it duller, and I'd have to work out where warm and cool and all that went. I understand you mean industrial shapes, but it's the same principle. When I draw architecture, I draw the effect of the detail. Once we get to a place where it's just not possible to draw the detail, where the line thickness itself would stop you drawing all the lines you need to draw to accurately draw what's there, we have to then capture the effect of what's there. And there are certainly curves in that. I mean, a lot of the decorative interior of the Palais Garnier, I mean, if you look at the interior scenes, particularly on my Instagram account, going back a bit, the detail there, if you zoom into the picture, you'll see that there's a lot less detail than you think. So yeah, so certainly it can apply, but it's I'm afraid it's just a bit hard. It's a bit hard to work out. I think, beyond that, but certainly what I was saying about edge and form and being aware of, is a form curving away from us, coming towards us? Am I seeing an edge, or am I simply seeing where a rounded form is disappearing from view? Because if it's the latter, then I think I need to draw it with a much more delicate line. Yes, please give a like. I need to wrap this up. It's time for a coffee. It's time for something. And time to go and get some sun, I think. But hey, yeah, thank you for joining me. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the super thankses, for the donations. I do appreciate it. I really do. And I love all the comments. I am starting to have trouble answering every comment now. I feel like it's rude not to answer a comment if someone's taken the time to say something, but it is starting to become a bit overwhelming, the number of comments that I have to get back to. And particularly if you leave a comment to a comment I've made to one of your comments, I don't get to all of those. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So, can you send me a message to my Instagram instead? I'm kind of locked out of my Facebook at the moment. I've really stopped using Facebook. I'm afraid, Araset. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. And look, I'm hoping to do a live. I don't know. I don't know whether every week will be too much, whether I'll have anything to say, but I tried to respond to Instagram messages, but again, I've had to pull back from Instagram because I'm on YouTube. I've got a lot of Instagram followers as well. It does get tricky. And my eyes can only take so much screen as well. So, yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, or probably a great night for most of you. So thanks for staying up. I'll see you next time. Bye.